So we would typically expect a large-scale study to at least have hundreds of participants. Longitudinal evidence means that the participants in a study are followed over a sustained period of time. This is meant to help us demonstrate sustained shifts rather than natural shifts that return to an original baseline or would have recurred regardless of intervention. Having a longitudinal study where a majority of the participants stay in the study is actually what gives credence to the conclusions we draw about the effects of a therapeutic intervention. The single study, Pela and Sutton, 2021, that's cited to support reintegrative therapy began with 75 participants, which is a non-negligible number, but it's nowhere near what we would need to qualify a study large scale. Less clear from the summary statement on the website, only 22 participants remained in the study for the 2 years they were being followed. This is an incredibly low retention rate of 29%, which severely limits what can be said conclusively with the available data.
Here we go. She completely misrepresents the research design and outcome data of the Pela and Sutton study. She's using the same arguments Gregory Coles tried to use in his essays criticizing the same study a couple years ago.
According to the abstract, this 2-year longitudinal study featured 75 adult male participants. In reading the study itself, we learn that this is true, but not the whole truth. In fact, 105 adult males began the study. By the end of 2 years, only 22 of them remained. In other words, the study was truly a longitudinal 2-year study, and it did in fact have 75 participants, but only 22 of those participants were actually studied for the full 2 years. The other 53 discontinued therapy before then. This places the study's retention rate at a striking low 29%.
Well, Julia, you copied off the wrong kid in class. I already thoroughly dismantled Gregory Coles in this video. Not to mention I interviewed Carolyn Pela and Joe Nicolosi Jr. after the study was originally published. So you can hear from Dr. Pela herself as she explains the research design.
So Dr. Pela's work is really kind of a different category of work. It's people who are open to exploring it and just seeing what happens when they receive trauma treatment.
Can I here's something else that's really different about this. We were flies on the wall. So this isn't like your normal laboratory study. We were just coming in and observing what's happening to real people in these real clinics, everyday life, which again, the validity and the generalizability of our findings is increased because of that part of the design. So I just wanted to throw that in there because these folks were people who were just going to therapy. We didn't require a certain number of sessions. Their therapy just went as their therapy went, and we just
it's a very natural
observed.
process.
Exactly.
The fact these falsehoods about the study are still being promulgated to this day is appalling. Julia, you should be ashamed of yourself for everything you've said in this video, but especially this part. You are misrepresenting the research to the public, and that is a serious ethical violation. She falsely claims that the Pela and Sutton study followed only 22 participants, and that most of these 75 participants did not stay in the study, trying to conclude that we have no way of knowing the outcome of 71% of participants. That is incorrect. All 75 participants met the pre-established inclusion criteria of staying in the study for at least 6 months. So you have the baseline assessments and a 6-month assessment. The outcome data reflect complete reports from all 75 participants. Many participants identified as dropped out by Sadusky and Gregory Coles were actually early completers who met their therapy goals before the 2-year maximum follow-up period. Okay, all they had to do was agree to do the therapy. They do assessments at baseline and then another assessment every 6 months. There's no requirement that they stay in the whole study of 2 years. It wasn't a 2-year study. It was a longitudinal study in that they would be assessed every 6 months during their therapy up until 2 years, because she had to set a limit at some point, Carolyn Pela. And actually publish her findings. So she couldn't just keep doing assessments indefinitely or doing assessments post-therapy, because that can impact the actual outcome data and the effectiveness, or the report on how effective therapy was, because they could then have confounding factors after the discharge. So it was only while they're in therapy up until 2 years. Obviously, some clients are going to discharge before 2 years, and some are going to continue in therapy more than 2 years. So she just chose 2 years as the cutoff mark. That was all that's required to be part of the study. So no one, it's not like we had a low retention rate for the study, that people dropped out. It was some people, we had a higher number of 100-something that did not stay for the whole study because maybe for various reasons they didn't last 6 months. But people who did the 6-month follow-up and then discharge, they weren't dropouts. Most of them were early completers. They've met their therapy goals much sooner. That might sound crazy to you, but when you're using the trauma interventions, it actually helps speed up the process because we're using the power of memory reconsolidation. See my recent interview with Nicolosi Jr. about what we can learn from memory reconsolidation research. Don't just take my word for it. Look at Bruce Ecker's research and think, how can that be applied to sexual arousal templates? There you go.
If you heard a therapist claim that I read a study that followed 22 people for 2 years of therapy, and because of this, we have large-scale, longitudinal evidence that this new therapy is effective, you would likely have a different reaction to the claim than if you were told, I read a study that followed 75 people for 2 years and have large-scale, longitudinal evidence that this therapy is effective. And even if all 75 people stayed in the Pela and Sutton study for the entire 2 years, that would only be evidence from a single study of a totally new therapy. It's important to be honest about what we can and can't say from a single study. And we have to be all the more modest when the majority of the participants of a study drop out before the study is completed. And we actually have no way of knowing the eventual outcome of 71% of the original sample's trauma symptoms, mood symptoms, or their sexual attractions. So until more research is done that would indicate that reintegrative therapy does better or is equally effective as trauma therapies in treating trauma symptoms, and show that specific trauma symptoms like nightmares, flashbacks are significantly improved, and demonstrates this through repeated studies with a similar outcome, I would encourage clinicians to address trauma symptoms when present in clients with established trauma protocols that are well researched. Large-scale, longitudinal evidence of reintegrative therapist claims may come, but it doesn't exist from the current research available.
As I've already demonstrated, Julia Sadusky is either ignorant, and maybe willfully so, or she's being intentionally misleading, meaning she might be lying, when it comes to the research design and outcomes in the Pela and Sutton study. I don't know her personally, so I'm going to assume ignorance before malice. And I get it. Reading journal articles isn't fun, and it can be confusing. I hate to do it myself. But, Julia, the ethical and professional thing that you should have done, if you had doubts about the reported results from the already many times over peer-reviewed journal article, was reached out to the lead author, Carolyn Pela, to express your concerns or get clarification. Instead, you ended up going on a very public platform and presenting false information about the scientific data, misleading everyone who looks up to you as a purported researcher and authority on sexuality subjects. For that alone, if you have any integrity, you should remove this video and issue an apology.